Hello, everybody. Today on the podcast, we have Erin Young from Slide UX. Um, Erin and I got introduced to each other, I think, back in 2017. I think she looked up the emails because I didn't have any records. And I don't remember what led me to Slide UX or to even start looking at UX as a thing to do. But I think at the time, if I remember correctly, we were having issues with customers confusing our services because we had two services on the paper tube side. One was selling kind of stock um, products that we had in our warehouse ready for immediate shipping, and then the other one we had was custom made products that were made to user specifications, and they could figure out the specs, materials, customization options, and we would like build custom packaging for them. But the way we had it presented on the site, I think we had stock tubes and custom tubes, and there was a lot of confusion because people were contacting us and they were like, "Well, I'd really like to buy a stock tube, but with my logo on it." And we were like, well, why the hell is this happening? Because to us it was very clear. One is like a stocked item, and the other one's a custom item. But the way people maybe thought about it was um, stock is a maybe tooling or stock default item that could be customized. And so I think that led us to start looking at our user experience and start reevaluating our kind of service offering and product offering, and which I think is what led us to Erin. I don't remember if that's the case, but that seems about right because I remember that was the time we were having those issues. And
Right.
so maybe give us like a quick introduction about yourself, about the company, and user experience in general, because I think a lot of people are confused about the need for user experience and what it actually means and what it entails. And so,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Erin Young. I am a founder at Slide UX, which is a boutique user experience consultancy based in Austin, Texas. And we've been around for about 12 years. My background is in marketing. So I studied marketing and I was a part of a web marketing team in house at a multinational technology company that had an e-commerce site where I learned a lot about what it was like to run a complex digital experience. And then I worked for an agency, which was helping kind of create uh, custom digital experiences for marketers as well. And based on those two experiences, I found myself with the opportunity to start consulting in 2010. So it's been about 14 years since I left full-time employment.
mm,
And a couple of years after setting out on my own, I realized that I had more opportunity than I had time, and I needed to consider whether it was time to grow the team and become something more than just a freelancer. And made that choice in 2012. And it's been a really, really interesting time to be in this space because when I was first getting started in this space, people who contacted us for user experience services were self-qualifying in that
mm,
they were people who were sophisticated. They knew exactly what user experience was because so few people knew what it was. Anybody that was reaching out to us was already a part of user experience work in their jobs. But UX really became a buzzword. And
right.
there was a large period of time where it was used to refer to anything and everything. A lot of designers relabeled themselves as UX designers during that period because it had become so popular. And for us, the sales cycle really changed from having these highly qualified folks that knew exactly what they were looking for to having people that were just maybe looking to have an app built. And they thought that they needed to hire a user experience designer in order to build an app or whatever the request might be. I think that now we're in another interesting phase where last year, 2023, was a difficult year for tech investment overall. And a lot of different professions have felt the impacts of that with layoffs and reduced investment. And UX is no different. So there's been a lot of sort of constriction around investment in tech overall. and that's affected UX. But for us, it's kind of compounded by the fact that a lot of people have taken interest in our field over the past 10 or so years, maybe even I would say 5 or so years. And I think that COVID led a lot of people to look at what careers they were interested in. UX rose to the top of the list for a lot of people that were looking to maybe just graduate or change jobs. And so we have a lot of people that are really interested in becoming UX designers right now, but we have less growth in our field than we have had for the past decade or so. So it's been interesting to navigate all of that with the advent of generative AI at the same time, and the uncertainty that that brings to what our jobs will look like in the future.
Mm.
But that's a little bit about our space. Our company has always ranged between 10 and 20 or so employees. Not always, obviously, we started out smaller than that. But that's kind of the size range in which we've been for the past several years, and we serve product teams. So often this can be a product manager, a director of product, a VP of product, and their team. And oftentimes we're helping companies that don't have in-house user experience talent, or if they do, something about that team's availability or capacity doesn't match with what our client teams need. And so we're helping them with user research. This is understanding how users think about their problems, what motivates them, what their pain points are. We help them with user interface design to solve those problems and to overcome them. And then strategy around user experience. What should it be? How do we mash up what users need with what the business wants to achieve, and kind of drive users in the direction of taking the actions that the business wants them to take. So it really ties back, David, to what you said earlier. Your project had a component of user experience. What do users experience? How do they perceive this? And then it had a component of user interface design. How are we going to
Hmm.
update the interface to better achieve the goals of the business? And that's kind of the third component, what the business is looking to achieve.
Hmm. And typically the achievement is the more sales, higher conversion rates. I
Yeah,
imagine, or just more happiness associated with the use of the app. Better addiction mechanisms.
there are so many possible benefits. So it can be increased revenue because people stay subscribed, because people tell their friends. It can be more accurate completion of a task flow. So if we're
Hmm.
designing an internal tool, for example, and people are skipping all of these form fields because they don't make any sense or they don't suit
Mm.
reality, redesigning that to match reality will give the business better information, better data. Um, and maybe produce better outcomes depending on what the situation is. Another big one is reduced support costs. So a lot of times
Right.
confusion is expensive to the business, and when we reduce support costs, we also increase satisfaction. So the benefits are sort of multifaceted, and for each of our clients, we talk a lot about what that looks like as we engage on a project.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's difficult to articulate the problem other than just sort of from a customer perspective. To even know when to contact somebody about those issues, because a lot of times they're kind of abstract problems that people, especially in smaller firms and a higher level, don't even get the privy to, right? Because it's
Right.
like, um, for example, I think it would stem, just again as a random example, even from our side, it's like our customer support person would start complaining that she doesn't have enough time to do other things on her plate. And then you start kind of seeing, like, all right, where's that coming from? Well, she's having to spend so much time on answering customer questions. It's like, well, that never happened before. Like, why is that a problem now? Then you start analyzing the questions that she's being asked, and then you realize that a lot of those questions are stemming from the confusion of what your website is saying relative to how people understand it. And then you're like, all right, that's a problem. And then that I think that leads us to you, right? Is that kind of
Well,
is that a perceived journey?
yeah, I think what you experienced in a way was that you kind of did the UX research yourself by uncovering that there was a mismatch between what users expected and how you were presenting your products because you discovered the symptoms. And that is one way that it can happen.
Hmm.
But ultimately, our mission is to create cultures where continuous observation and evaluation of digital experience is a part of the process so that we can catch those unknowns by proactively talking to
Mm.
users about the interfaces that we build. And in a really ideal situation, we're talking to customers about the interfaces before they're built so that we don't actually invest in building it the wrong way. So that can look like showing somebody a prototype, and I say somebody, showing a set of users
Hmm.
in the target audience a prototype of what we're planning to build and getting their input on it to catch any glaring issues, if possible, before it's actually built that way. And that way we don't pay for development twice. That's one of the big cost savings
Mm.
of a great UX program. So an example of that is I often talk to teams who come with an understanding of the problem or the feature or whatever it is that they're trying to build. And sometimes they're kind of like, well, we don't need to talk to users. We've heard this from users. We just need your help in designing the solution. Fair
Hmm.
enough. There's a lot of knowledge, right, inside of teams. Um, but we recently embarked on a project where we helped define a solution with the requirements that our clients understood and really encourage them, hey, you don't have to pay us to do it, but please talk to customers about this before you send it to your developers. And they did that, thankfully. And when they did, they learned that a whole portion of what they thought we needed to build was actually not being requested by customers. We had designed something more complex than what customers needed.
Mm.
And by talking to users upfront about it, they were able to realize that and significantly reduce the scope of the engineering and development effort for that feature, which is another cool outcome.
Yeah, that's interesting because you don't tend to think about it from that perspective. Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of, I mean, I think a lot of what you're talking about refers to like larger teams. Maybe it's a a newer product inside of an established brand. It's a larger company, somebody like, let's say, Microsoft or somebody, in the software space. Because a lot of it is technical products, isn't it?
Yeah, there is it's technical teams, and
Mm-hmm.
the size of our client teams can vary. We can work with startups in the technology space,
Mm-hmm.
all the way up to departments in large corporations, and we've got clients all along that spectrum. But they are entrepreneurial and they're tech oriented. So oftentimes that title of product is a key that they're thinking of their digital experience as a
Yeah.
product, and that's sort of a signifier that they anticipate continued investment. And this is something that they plan to manage on an ongoing basis. In your case, David, I think you may not have viewed your digital experience as the product. You probably
No,
viewed the product as the product.
that's
But
right.
depending on the company, they might see the digital experience as part of the product too. And I think in a company like yours, it would have had to get to a certain scale before you identified that the digital experience was also an important product. But in another company, that sort of scale might not be necessary, depending on how they think about their situation.
Yeah, that's a completely different way to think about it. Because again, being on a smaller business side, for the past 20 years of my career, we've never really thought of our digital assets as a product
Mm-hmm.
because it was just a website that is more residing in the marketing side
Yeah,
um, than the product side because the product
yeah,
was always something physical you delivered that people were actually paying for.
right,
And and
right.
then and then the website is just more lead generation, product catalog, contact form, about us
Mm-hmm.
page. And so that was never really, it was very dumb, I guess, from a product perspective. 'Cause, no, dumb in regards to like the websites that I'm used to are fairly dumb relative to the products you're describing because a lot of times the products you're referring to are the actual product that people are buying, like they're the app, they are they are something that has subscription access, that people pay for.
That can
So
be the case, right? Yeah, it can be things that people are buying, things that companies are investing in that digital experience.
they're a
Right.
significant cost center at the very least.
Right, right. But then there's also like on the e-commerce side, oftentimes in an e-com focused company, or a company that's investing in e-com, it doesn't have to be their primary focus, but something they've chosen to invest in, they
Hmm.
will have product leaders on their web team. So those
Oh wow.
product leaders might roll up to the CMO. They're still in marketing, but they're acting like a software team because the website has
Hmm.
software like needs, you know?
Yeah, that again, that's interesting, and that's something I never thought about because we never really had a product team. It was really like, all right, let's add a page. We have to add a new product, and for whatever reason, this button doesn't seem to be generating enough sales. Let's
Yep.
expand
Yeah.
it to have the quantity field with the plus minus, and then let's move it up.
Yeah. Well, in the early stages, what I see is that the founder is, or the CEO is the head of product de
Right.
facto until that's delegated to someone else. And a lot of companies won't realize that that's the skill set they need. So we've had companies that, and the tech companies totally know because they've been on teams in enterprise and they know kind of how the progression works. But I have also worked with clients who the CEO or the founder is way too time starved to be an effective partner for us because they've got
Hmm.
1,000 other things to do. And we will gently encourage them to consider a product hire in addition to a UX hire because those two roles are they're partner roles and they each kind of represent different points of view around the same thing. They can also both be fractional. They don't necessarily have to be full time. But a product leader can take significant weight off of the shoulders of a small business leader if digital experience decisions are an important part of what they do. And the product leader is also typically just better at it. That's the thing, right? With any of those sort of delegations that a founder or a CEO is going to do in the early stages, oftentimes you're going to hire someone specialized and then you're going to go, wow, okay, they're handling that very differently than I did, and that's great. That's the
Hmm.
way it should be done.
Do you guys end up serving as that product person for a lot of companies also, or are you just kind of working alongside the product?
That's a great question. We're a really good partner for product. We do sometimes bring uh, product into teams on a contract basis as well. And it's an important role. The product leader is interacting with the business, they're interacting with the design team, and they're also interacting with the engineering team.
Hmm.
So it's really helpful for us to have them around because if there's nobody serving in that role, sometimes there are gaps that we're then going to need to fill. One of them specifically is around phasing um, ideas. Oftentimes we design something that represents what we ultimately think it should be like, and everybody's excited about that vision. But building it all at once is not a great way of approaching it because it can take a long time and you lose the opportunity to learn during that period
Hmm.
of time. By the
Right.
time it releases, it might not be the right thing anyway. So a great product leader will often help us with the phasing of breaking it down into units of work that a development team can kind of work on and release
Hmm.
in an agile fashion over time. And that takes a lot of work, negotiation to figure out what that phasing is. So we really appreciate that function.
That's hard to do because it's exactly like you outlined. Now that I think about it, even when I was starting the company, it was so many potential roadmaps to build, even with a physical product being outside of the digital product. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you curate what the right path is? Because even with the same outcome in mind, it's like, yes, I want to decrease my cost of service. I want to increase my conversion rates on the website. I want to understand my customers better. There's like so many potential roadmaps that lead in that direction. How do you how do you curate that roadmap among all the potential options? That's a hard thing
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah, it really is. And I think one of the smartest ways that we see product teams approach that is by stacking things on the basis of like experiment value. So
Hmm.
oftentimes, each of the things you could do, there's an assumption there about why that might be valuable to the business. And if you can take the most valuable assumptions and test those first, you can narrow the scope of what you should be focused on by proving or disproving those assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it can be really exciting to see that happen effectively, because it can minimize waste or, excess investment.
And waste of time, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I imagine the budgets don't change. The scope has to change, not the budgets. Because
That's
typically
right. Yeah.
people aren't limited by scope. They're typically limited by budget and time.
Yeah. Yeah. And time is a big factor too, in navigating what's best, because we can imagine really fabulous user experiences that might take a lot of effort to build. And so partnering with product and engineering, we can figure out what they realistically can get done and what the priority of this particular thing is, and design to that, rather than just imagining the best possible experience, which is what a designer is going to do in the absence of constraints.
Right. What do you consider a good um, experience? Like how do you define a good experience? And
Oh,
is it defined with the brain or with the heart? Is it like quantifiable numbers or is it just like the happiness factor?
well, there may be happiness, but more often it's a sense of sort of invisibility. A really good experience is just going to work the way that you thought it would, and you might not even reflect on the fact that it was a good experience. That's sort of the debate that we sometimes have. There's this concept of delighting the user, and that's cool. But like sometimes we'll be designing a new website for a gas utility company, right? Nobody is wanting to be delighted by the gas
Nobody
utility
cares
company.
in their heart
Yeah.
about it for sure.
Yeah. They just want to get it done, and they want it to just be simple and intuitive and have it be completed as effectively as possible. So, in that case, the user experience goals might not be around any sort of emotional response. But then on the flip side, if you're over in consumer and you're trying to sell, some sort of product that is all about the user's sentiment towards it, the goals might be very much associated around their emotional response. So it really is situational.
Yeah, because I think the right answer to what you're describing is a great experience is invisible. It's like kind of
Mm-hmm.
like your utilities. You have the power on and your sewers work, and it's like you don't think about any of those things.
Right.
You
Yeah.
only start noticing if any of those things are broken.
That's right. Yeah. So, for example, like a customer going through your flow and thinking, well, I want a stock tube. I just want to have this printed on it. And well, that's not how we define the stock tube. That's a perfect example of the sort of friction that
Hmm.
becomes visible to the user if the experience doesn't match their mental model for what they were expecting it to be. And the truth is that our mental models change over time too. So it's not like you can ever be 100% done with something, because
Mm.
our expectations are influenced by everything that we're experiencing. And so you could have industry influences that change expectations, maybe another sort of product that your target customer often has to procure, changes the way that they're delivering their product.
Mm.
That could impact the expectations for yours. Or it can be like consumer level things. Like, for example, a lot of the features that we see on an Amazon or a Walmart.com are now
Yeah.
expected in B2B e-commerce, because as consumers, we've come to expect those things.
Yeah, that's interesting because you could be doing everything right and then sort of the standard of living changes and now you have to adapt. It's
Yeah.
like the new iPhone releases with the scrolling this way now, and then now all of a sudden all websites have a scroll bar at the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, things are constantly changing. There are some things that are timeless, and those are fun too. Because when we go into analyze an experience without talking to users, if we're just auditing it with our own experience, we're limited in the depth of um, expertise that we can offer. It's guesses, if you will, about based on our experience, what we've seen in the past, what parts of this might be confusing to users. Um, but there are some things that are true that we can bring into those conversations. One good example of that is that users don't read. Users scan.
That's true.
They've never read, they're never going to read. They're always going to scan. And so if you really need to communicate something to them in order for them to be successful, you have to be really thoughtful about how you word it and how you present it. And there's also kind of the blindness that comes with a call out. If something's called out too prominently, it looks like a promotion, it looks like an ad, users will then overlook it for that reason
Yeah.
too. So the most prominent message is sometimes the one that's skipped. Um, and so even without talking to users, sometimes we can sit down and help improve uh, an interface based on the things that we know to be true. And then further refinement comes from conversations with people.
Hmm. How do you take user input? Um, with what grain of salt should you take user input? Because I know, and I'm sure I've personally done it, where I've been asked to do things, or whether something is good, or to offer my opinion, and I have, but that doesn't necessarily mean I would actually buy it. It's like, oh, if only it was this much, I'd buy it. And then you make it this much, and all of a sudden, nobody's buying it still.
Yeah. Yeah. We warn people about that. So um, users, like you said, are notoriously bad at predicting their own behavior. So we try not to ask them about future um, uh, hypotheticals. Would you do this or would you not do this? We can ask questions like, "Are you interested in this? Would you consider this?" They're going to be able to answer that more accurately. But would they ultimately buy? That's a question better answered by testing it on production, putting it out there and seeing whether they actually do. But users can tell us some things that are really interesting. For one, users can talk to us about what they're trying to do, what their motivations are, what their pain points are. So understanding the problems that they're trying to solve is really important. And that's an example where, like, ideally, you're doing that before you design. But in the case of the client story I told earlier, showing them a design after the fact might also help them describe what is and is not a pain point for them. Like,
Hmm.
I wouldn't use that feature. I don't need that. Okay, great. That's good feedback too. We can also observe users as they move through an experience and talk to
Mm.
them about why they're making the choices that they're making, and why they're hesitating. So these are, we think of these as user research and usability testing.
Right.
And you can learn similar things from both of those. But yeah, it's not necessarily about their future behavior. We can talk to them about their past behavior. We can talk to them about the way they view a problem or what their expectations would be for how something would work. But we have to test it kind of with real customers when it comes to actual purchasing.
Yeah, that's actually a great point that and I wrote it down. Do not use users to predict future behavior, but more observe and ask them about the problems and pain points.
Yeah.
That's spot on.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's twofold. You want to understand their problems and pain points with your interface. That's um, evaluating the designs or the experience that you've already built. You also just want to understand their problems and pain points at a macro level and have
Mm.
conversations with them about what they really need. So, like, in the case of your website checkout flow having caused confusion, you identified that in one way. But another way to identify that would have been putting the user interface aside entirely and listening to conversations about what their hopes would be,
What are they trying to
and what the
achieve?
ideal scenario would be for them. And in that case, I might have said, yeah, I don't think my needs are anything unique here. I just want to purchase, something standard and have it labeled. And they probably could have told you that without looking at the user interface. But had you known that, you might have designed it differently the first time.
Yeah, and it's one of those, I think, universal things that you've described before, where it's like all of these motivations are fairly standardized and they rarely change. It's like I want the least number of clicks between finding something I like and getting it to my door.
Yeah, there's that. And then there's also one thing that I was talking about recently is understanding all of the potential objections. Um, I volunteered at my kids' seventh grade science field trip recently. And when she was teaching us these different labs that we needed to teach the kids, the instructor was able to say, and the kids are going to do this. They're going to want to play with those pipe cleaners. They're going to get more of these papers than they're supposed to. She knew the patterns in what they were going to want to do and like how we would potentially overcome those challenges
Mm.
to look out for this, look out for this. It's the same sort of stuff with user behavior, like obstacles to checkout. What's the return policy? Is this item going to fit? Is this an accurate picture of the specific thing
Yeah.
that we're talking about? There's some commonalities which you can use secondary research to find reports where usability practitioners have reported on all of these common issues with certain situations that you can then design against those objections. But when you get into custom software, that's not always the case. With custom software, you might need to conduct your own research because your
Right.
own situation is unique.
Because it's never been done before. You're ultimately creating
Yeah.
something for, right. So it's like
Yeah.
there are universal standards based on human motivations and expectation managements. Like, yes, will this dress look exactly like this, and will it look exactly like the picture on your model in my
Mm-hmm.
mirror?
Yeah.
And are the color patterns between the screen and the real life are the same?
Mm-hmm.
And will it arrive within the proper period of time that you're
Mm-hmm.
outlining? Because I have an event coming up. And uh, is it returnable in case it doesn't fit? And what is that process like? Am I going to sit, for 30 minutes on the phone with your customer service rep in order to get an RMA number? Like, because that's crazy. Then I'm just might as well not buy anything. And then you
Yep.
have the other side of it where like somebody's building brand new software for some niche that they just discovered that needs to be tended to, and it's never really been done before. And so you kind of start with like your minimum viable product, and then you start A/B testing to see which behavior leads to better outcomes, right?
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Some of the facts about user behavior, the common patterns will impact their experience, and we can use those to guide decisions. But then there's a whole other layer of information that's just not available to discover because it is so specific to their context. So I think part of what our field is about is mixing those data sources, mixing the industry-wide best practices for how certain interactions work on certain devices, mixing those with information gathered specific to this client and this client's specific expectations, because there's always a visionary associated with a new feature or product. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's the CEO, maybe that's somebody inside of the company who has an idea of how it's supposed to work. Whether that's good or bad idea, they have it, and we have to navigate that part too. Making sure that their ideas are represented well enough that they're satisfied with it being the right feature, but then also helping safeguard against the risks of it not being the right idea, and giving them the processes to catch that if that's the case.
It's an interesting role because again, you're sort of in the shoes of the implementer, to borrow the EOS terms, because you have the visionary and then you have the implementer, right? And
Yeah.
so you have the maybe the CEO or the founder of the company, they're kind of ready to run wild with these things and they have all these ideas, and you kind of have to ground them and tell them, well, in the most polite way, that this one is the wrong path based
Yeah.
on what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's right. And we win some and we lose some with that. I often say that UX design is 95% communication,
Hmm.
because we have to be great communicators to gather the information that we need to understand what their vision initially was. And then we have to be really great communicators to help move that vision in the ways it needs to be moved. Navigating, negotiating the parts of
Hmm.
it that maybe we can tell aren't going to serve the user well. We've got to be good at relaying the input that we receive from customers
Yeah.
in a way that makes sense to the audience who needs to hear it, because in some situations it might be the customer gave this feedback and the user experience team alone has the authority to go and make this change, but oftentimes that's a negotiation with several other parties and teams who have stake in what's being built too, and we've got to figure out what's the most effective way to deliver that.
Yeah, it's very much you have to be part psychologist and part engineer.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of that's what I found in my work. It's you ultimately have to offer the product that sells, but at the same time, it's the people that make it, that and the communication and the relationships and the culture around that have to that probably matters more if I don't know if it matters more. Probably I think it actually, I think it actually matters more, to be
Yeah.
honest, the human factor than the product.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think, you know, the products are great, but if they're not selling to the people, then what do you have? You have something that you think is great, but it's of no value. So you've got to figure out how to get there. And there's internal communication to get there, and then there's external communication too.
Right? Because in your brain, you want to always strive for efficiency, but sometimes efficiency is the wrong answer because the
Yeah.
efficiency then squeezes all the magic out of the product usage or the feeling that the users get when they're using the product. Sometimes that little level of friction creates a better experience than the efficiency of you know a product page to a cart.
Yeah, no, that's so true. There can be a lot of good reasons for friction. Definitely, if you're trying to deliver a certain experience, that gives you the space in which to do that. So there can be kind of brand benefits to that, but also educational benefits
Mm,
and benefits around certainty too. Like we tested a website once where they instituted a really prominent path for conversion, which in this case was like to find an agent.
hmm.
And users were intended to review the website, decide that they were excited about this service, and then find an agent. That was the ideal path. And when they launched the website, it looked like that's what was happening. It looked amazing because they had so many people visiting the find an agent page. But we did usability testing, and what we learned is that that call to action was so prominent that people were going down that path before they
They were ready.
understood the benefits
Yeah.
of doing so. And that meant that when they arrived on that page, they were just kind of like, oh, I don't need an agent. Why am I here? And they would just abandon
Mm.
because they hadn't actually been sold on the service first. So it's a really good example of where friction can be helpful. We needed to slow them down.
Yeah, then you have to understand what the customer, not only what their needs are, but what their expected journey map is, because sometimes the product experience or the purchasing experience is an adventure and discovery, and sometimes it's just an efficient thing. Like you're on Amazon, I need a charger for my phone, I know what that looks like, all I want is to press buy with one button, and then that thing arrives next day to me. And
Yep.
sometimes when you're looking for an agent or when you're looking at software that you're about to sign up for on a monthly basis, you not only want to make sure that obviously there's social proof and that other customers like me like it, but that I vibe with this company as the brand itself. And that could be its own little space that you kind of engineer for, right?
Right. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And so we try to look at what the happy path is, an ideal customer experience, but then we also try to look at all of the various permutations of how it could
Mm,
go. And there are so many, so by brainstorming with the teams, we can often generate a lot of ideas. They already understand a lot of those scenarios, but maybe they haven't thought of it that way. So we get it all kind of out on paper, and then we kind of talk about priorities and the commonness of each of the things that we've imagined, because it's important that we focus on the ones that are happening most often. So yours was an example of an acute issue with
yeah.
a mismatch between expectations and whatever. And so there's kind of the continuous improvement of user experiences, and then there's identifying and solving acute issues related to user experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine a part of it also falls on the marketing side because if you're launching a new company or a new brand or even a new product line, and it's kind of a saturated space, what you want to see is, in addition, what your customers want, what your kind of baseline in that industry is. And so you start looking at maybe the way your competitors do things, and you start noticing the problems that they are potentially having. Or maybe there's a cohort of customers that they're kind of leaving out of their experience, and that's your customer base as a target. And then so you
Yep.
start modifying your experience of that journey mapping to figure out, how do I trap these customers who are not being served by all these other competitors?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, customer expectations created by competitors, or even just other experiences that they utilize frequently, because sometimes, especially in B2B, you'll have expectations that are being set by other things that are often a part of that person's job. Let's
That's right.
say you're an industrial procurement specialist and you are used to using this certain ERP software, and
Hmm.
it has certain labels, and like 80% of the space, they're all using this software. Well, we might try to create the most user friendly label inside of our web experience using just general um, language, right? But if they have a certain meaning associated with a certain thing that's specific to their space, then we're going to help that audience the most if we use the labels they're familiar with. And user research can help us discover what software we need to be paying attention to. It can help us discover where expectations are set, who we're
Mm.
competing with, and why.
Hmm.
Sometimes it can be unexpected. One really common situation, and anybody who hears this who's designed software will probably, if for B2B specifically, will probably relate to this, is that oftentimes in B2B, the biggest competitor is Excel, because people are
Mm.
used to solving problems on their own using Excel. And it is so flexible that you have to be better than that to get them to use something else,
Mm.
which can be so frustrating. I've heard so many product leaders kind of, oh my gosh, they're over there doing this in Excel and it just seems so backwards. But honestly, I personally go to spreadsheets all the time when I need to solve problems. It's a powerful tool. So how can you be better than that?
That's pretty funny actually, because I do the same thing. Like the first when I need to think, I don't open Word, I open Excel.
Yep. Yep. It's super, super common. And anything that has kind of a data element to it, people are like, let me get the data and I'll do what I want with it in Excel. And, they want their products to be better than that. But it's another example of how sometimes a great user experience isn't about the design of the user interface of
Hmm.
what we're making. In that case, offering the customer an export functionality might
Right.
really make them happy. So sometimes the customer experience improvements aren't digital interface improvements at all.
Yeah, they're not design based. They're kind of
Mhm.
analytical or just ease of usage.
Right, right. Because the customer experience or the user experience is not just the interfaces. And that's another thing that we talk about. You mentioned marketing
Yeah.
earlier. Um,
Yeah.
Part of how a significant part of how we experience something is motivated by our expectations coming into it. And so it's important that we understand not only how they're experiencing our thing, but also what they expected when they were arriving. Because if we're setting the wrong expectations somewhere else, you're going to get bad marks for user experience. But maybe the problem is that you're explaining this wrong in another
Mm.
place, or you're attracting the wrong sort of people with the sort of marketing that you're using, so on and so forth. So the before and after pieces of the customer experience or user experience research are just as important as the thing that we're designing.
Yeah, it's a pretty wide net. If the question is what's wrong, the answer it could be anything because
Mm-hmm.
it could be the user interface, it'd be the ability to export, it could be the mapping of the buttons, it could be not enough friction, it could be the language of the copy,
Yep.
it could be the placement of the logo. I mean, there's like all things to consider. There's a lot.
Yeah, there really are. And so ultimately, like, our goal is to help show our customers that don't have these skills in house, to show
Hmm.
them how much better their process can be if they've got UX on the team. And they can continue to work with us for that depending on their needs. Or oftentimes, we're helping them establish the demand for a full time hire. And we're helping them navigate what that looks like to grow a team. You need
Hmm.
certain people in certain order in order to be successful there. So I guess one of the flaws in our business model is that when we're really successful, they will hire a full-time UX team if
I
their
see.
organization, is of a certain size. And we celebrate that, even though it's not necessarily in our best financial interests to lose clients. We're really proud when that happens.
No, it's great. It's like you've convinced them that they have a bigger problem than you can actually that that it's cheaper for them to handle on their own than to hire somebody that's on the outside. That's
That's
actually
right. That's right.
that means your sales pitch is actually working. Like, good for you.
Yeah. Yeah,
No.
it's a level of commitment that sometimes, they have trouble getting buy-in early on because it's people have experiences sometimes with designers that are dissatisfactory, and maybe the person isn't strategic enough, doesn't utilize enough research,
Hmm.
maybe they have poor design sensibility, or it takes them too long to understand the problem. And um, in those cases there can be pushback that design is going to slow down the process and cost too much. And our goal is to show them that no, like, this can be really good. We can help you find talent that suits your needs, and doesn't trigger the pain points you've experienced in the past. And so that's kind of the ulterior motive. So we're helping them with the project now, but long term, we're also hoping that they start to implement these user focused
Hmm.
practices in their regular processes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And because I think you have to change the mindset of this, because it's a abstract thing to do. Because even like
Mm-hmm.
for us, we didn't end up hiring you. In fact, we didn't end
Yeah,
up hiring anybody, and we just
yeah,
kind of solved it internally because it was like
yeah,
it was so abstract that I had a hard time even finding like where to start, you know?
yeah,
And so I was
yeah,
like, well, let's just try a few names and see what kind of sticks. And that was basically the cheapest option that was the quickest. And then we measured it, and it's like, all right, sounds like we're not having these problems anymore, and people are less confused. Well, let's just leave it as is. And
yeah,
again, we're a smaller team, so
yeah.
it was a different mindset.
Absolutely. And like a small team that knows that they're not going to have a lot of UX needs over time, the sort of outsource model is a good one for them.
Hmm.
And we have teams that have smart engineering teams, and they've got what we call design systems, um, where we've designed enough for them that they can make new things using the stuff that we've already designed, and they use those patterns to solve problems that they feel equipped to solve, but they come back to us as needed when they enter into something that's beyond the patterns that we've
Hmm.
established,
Hmm.
or is a particularly complex problem, or maybe they took a swing at it, users are expressing confusion, and they know that they haven't solved it right. So then they'll bring us in ad hoc over time to solve problems like that in some situations. Other teams kind of keep us on retainer for fractional basis over time, and
Right.
that can work really well, and we can kind of surge up or drop down depending on the changing needs of their business. And sometimes it is just one-off consults on problems for small businesses. It depends on how important that product experience is to your business and what potential you see in it as to whether that investment makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's important, and sometimes people just don't understand how important
Yeah,
it is. I
that's
think that
so true, right? Because your business could have potentially gone a different direction where you made digital experience a big part of the value for your company had you chosen to go that route. It's not the right
that's right.
strategy for everyone, but for some companies that can be really, really lucrative.
Yeah, unfortunately, I equate it to health. It's like you don't think it's a problem until something starts going wrong when you're like 50, you know? And then all of a sudden you're rethinking your entire routine of, the last 30 years. Like maybe I should have worked out more. So it's very similar to that because these things don't manifest themselves until they manifest themselves.
Right. Yeah. I think that's similar to how careers work. I think we were talking about prior to this podcast when scheduling it. Maybe it was you I was talking about, but basically, I feel like I'm so aware at this point in my career of all the things I don't know.
Right.
But when I was 24, man, I knew everything.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. It's like I do jujitsu. It's a um, and it's a very humbling sport. But I heard recently that you don't actually start learning jujitsu until you're a black belt. And so it's exactly one of those things. You basically need that 10, 12, 15 years into the game to realize how much little you know,
Yeah.
because as a kind of a four stripe white belt 2 years in, you're like, oh my god, I know all these things and I'm going to start teaching people. And you're like, the
Right.
more you progress, the more you realize like how incompetent you are at things.
Right. Yes. And it doesn't help in technology that the goalposts are continuously moving both further and wider with everything that's possible. Which is it's fun too. Like I'm somebody who I like to continue learning. And so I enjoy that. And I like working with a wide range of clients on new problems. And so for me, that's kind of been ideal. However, it is humbling when every project is bringing new problems and you're learning new spaces and kind of seeing the size of what technology can do just increase so rapidly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you made the switch from your kind of a full-time job 14 years ago, um, what made you do it? Like it's hard going from something stable that obviously, to something like, well, let me give it a try and maybe run a minimum viable product on myself and see what that looks like. Like,
Yeah, honestly, it was a bit of that. So I was working full time for an agency during the 2008 financial crisis, and
mm,
their business was having to change. And I'd watched them lay off several times, which was my first brush with the impermanence of full-time work and the fact that it could really change at any time. Um, and also I was doing research to help them find contractors to augment our team. We
mm,
needed additional talent that they didn't want to hire full time given the instability in the market. And as I talked to contractors, I realized that there was a lot of perks to their jobs. They were working remotely, they were choosing their own projects, they were dictating their own hours, and so that kind of like just stashed in my brain. And later, when I was contacted about a contract opportunity, I was more open to it based on those factors. And so it started out with just working a contract role, another contract role, and then it turned into project based work as I became more comfortable with the risk. And I was lucky at the time because I was married. My husband was working full time. So we had the
mm,
safety net of his job. We didn't have any kids. And then in 2012, we did the math, and he was underutilized at his job. He did design as well full
mm-hmm,
time. And we did the math, and that was the really risky choice, was bringing him to join me at the business to increase my capacity, because we lost his benefits and
mm,
that steady salary with that choice. And then the real kicker, as life always does, we found out we were expecting like 4 or 5 weeks into him having left his full-time job. So I can always measure the age of our business by essentially the age of my second son, who was born right as we started Slide
wow,
UX.
that's very cool. So I looked at your site. That's Brent, right? Is that your
That's right.
husband?
That's right.
Okay. How is working with family? Because it's a gift and a curse. It's like, for me, my wife and I are both self-employed, and so she runs like a skincare company that she does like facials and sort of serve on the service side, and she's always run that for years. And I always had the paper tube company, and she always wanted to work together, but for a variety of reasons, we couldn't make it work. I had a partner, and so I didn't want his wife in there, and he didn't want my wife in there, and we always talked about it, but we never actually made it happen. And so now, as I'm kind of figuring out the next steps, obviously we're doing things together,
Mm-hmm.
and we're just in the beginning of maybe the next adventure. But what is it like working with your husband?
Right. Well, so there are plus sides and downsides. He and I make a good team just because of the way our minds are wired. We think differently, and so when we're solving problems together, it can be really helpful for both of our perspectives to be there. So on the plus side, number one, um, it was good for me to have him be a part of the business early on because it helped me for him to understand the risks that I was taking and for us to both really be a part of understanding all of that, making the
Mm,
calculations together, making the decisions together about where to invest and not invest. It
mhm,
had such a significant impact on our personal finances that I was glad to have him really involved in making those choices with me. And that was really empowering. And it was also good from the standpoint of understanding what the demands were, because there was a period of time where we were working so hard, and knowing what was going on and being able to kind of shift between personal obligations and caretaking responsibilities for our
Yeah.
kids, and understanding exactly what the deadlines or the pressures were, all of that was really helpful. But at the same time, we kind of had to keep business business and keep personal personal, and that's hard in a marriage, to have the professional relationship where
Yeah.
sometimes you've got to have hard conversations, and then try to have a positive personal relationship even when maybe there's friction going on at work. I think one of the saving graces for us is that in the early years, we spent so much time in client service that,
Hmm.
and we were both kind of the two principals of the business, that we were rarely working together on client work. If he was on a project, it was taken care of because he was on it. I'd be over here on this other project. And while we were familiar with what each other was doing, we weren't butting heads for control on projects. Um, but I will say that I it worked out really well for us, and I can't say that I would do it differently, but I do recognize the toll that it took at times, and um, it's also been interesting as we've gotten to a place where we're able to back away from the day to day,
Hmm.
because each of us had to navigate untangling our own personal identities from that of the
Yeah.
business, and we had our goals as a couple to make more space, but we didn't necessarily untangle our identities at the same pace. And so it's like, why are you on Slack right now? You're supposed to be, like stuff like that. Let's check out a little bit more. Oh no, I think they need me here, and I kind of like that they need me. That sort of push and pull has been interesting too. But ultimately, I guess the decisions worked out for us, and I can't see it having happened any other way because I didn't anticipate being an entrepreneur.
Right.
Um, but if you know that you want to be an entrepreneur and you've done it before, your results might vary.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a mixed bag because on the one hand, I fully understand that you have like somebody you can trust, and trust in any partnership in a business and otherwise is like the number one thing. You have to be able to
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
somebody there who you can leave, and then things will be taken care of, and they got your back, and like they won't take advantage of you. And so, having your spouse on that side, assuming it's the right spouse, obviously is a big deal.
Yep.
um, the other thing is the complementary skill set, and it's great that it worked out for you because you were on the marketing side and he was on the design side, and you're like, we don't have to double up on doing the same thing. We can all
Yeah.
have each separate competency and know that like two roles are now taken care of rather than one. You
Yeah.
know,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the other side is it's absolutely it's like sometimes you're a better boss than a husband, right? And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you're a better husband than a boss. And it's like, what does that dynamic look like? Um, so yeah, no, I totally get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, I it worked out really well for us. But it came with some costs, and I think that I'm grateful now to be in a position where we can correct for some of the costs that it did have, and approach things differently. It's all a learning process, and I will say that it definitely we definitely made some decisions around servant leadership and over indexing towards taking care of things ourselves to
Yeah,
help protect our team, that may not have happened had it not been a family unit. I think we felt like we had more resources between us because we pulled significantly from what might have normally been like work-life balance.
yeah,
And those were not good decisions. We had to kind of go back and fix those. And the new leaders that we have in place are much, much better about not letting those boundaries slip, which I am so grateful for.
yeah. Which is my second question. The second half of the question was, it says employee owned on your about us page. What does that
Yeah.
mean?
So we are owned by, at this point, by both Brant and I, still majority owners, but we've got three business partners inside of
Mm,
the company who are really our day to day leaders. And that's Megan, Tom, and Jordan, who you might also see on the website. And we've, over the past several years, kind of delegated more and more of leadership, and we essentially support them now. But gosh, they run it so much better than we ever did. So I'm so grateful to have them around.
That's awesome. And so then what's next for you? Because as you kind of start, first of all, you're 14 years in, it sounds like. That's
Yeah.
a long time to be in one single location, at least for me. Like, my
Yep.
wife and I are we're weird because we don't live in one single place long enough for it to make money as a real estate investment,
Yeah.
and we don't tend to end up staying on the same road. We tend, like, every 10 years we try to reinvent ourselves, like, with completely
Yeah.
something new. And
Yeah.
so seeing that you're 14 years in, I'm like, I'd be anxious because I was
Yeah.
10 years into my business and I was already tired. So it's like,
Right.
what's on the horizon?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're lucky that their leadership gives us the time to kind of free ourselves up to do other things. And right now, we're really enjoying getting a chance to participate really actively in our kids' lives, their sports. Volunteering at the school, doing all of that, helping our families. We moved from Austin to the Houston area so that we can be closer to our parents who are
Mm,
all aging and spending time with them too. And then we each kind of have our own volunteer and hobby routines. I'm really into art. I don't know, you might see some of the
that's very
art
cool.
behind me.
You
Yeah, so
paint, you
that's
paint yourself, or?
yeah. I like to paint, so that's my big thing, and I kind of enjoy spending time on that, and then volunteering for some nonprofits that I care about in addition to the school. And I'm just really grateful to have the chance to give time to those things.
That's awesome. That's great. All right. I think I ran out of questions. My only other question I have is, what's a really good book you read lately that you would recommend
Oh,
to people in the UX field, not in the UX field, personal reasons? Like, what's a good read?
What's a good read? What's a good read? Well, I was just talking about this recently. This one is not a recent read for me, but it was a book that got me interested in what I do. And I think for people interested in UX, it's an interesting way to understand how UX interacts with business, intersects with business, and it is called "Why We Buy: The Science of Shopping." And it is an older book. They've done a second edition to it since I first read it, and it helps you understand the ways in which observation can be used in a retail setting to understand why customers may or may not be purchasing. And that was actually kind of what sparked my interest in using observation to enhance experiences. I ended up doing it digitally, but the author of the book, Paco Underhill, ran a company that did this sort of retail observation and helped retailers improve sales by changing the physical space or the physical customer experience. One of the stories I use with my clients in digital came from that book. And it was about how there was a store in a mall that had a bathroom, which we all know in a mall, finding a bathroom can sometimes be a challenge. And a lot of customers would go into that store just to use the bathroom. And so they would hang signs for promotions to try to capture the attention of these customers as they entered, and they'd put them on the route to the bathroom. But what they learned was that they weren't performing as well as they could, because when people needed to pee, they were really focused on finding the
Right.
bathroom, and they were still ignoring the signs. When they turned the signs around to face customers as they exited
Ooh,
the
that's
bathroom,
very smart.
they right, they perform so much better. And so sometimes I'll talk to my clients in digital experiences about letting them pee, which is, if your customer has an urgent need that they're there to fulfill, maybe let them fulfill that need and then try to get them to do what else you'd like them to do, because they're going to be more receptive to it once they've completed the task that's on their mind.
That's brilliant. That's
Yeah,
very good.
yeah. It's a good book. I recommend it.
All right, I got it written down. We'll put it in the show notes. One last thing is, you mentioned the kind of AI and where the technology is going. And the technology on the UX side has kind of always been there. Like, years ago, when I was in the electronics business, we went to CES, and I met a company called Tobii, Tobii. They make, like, eye tracking technology. And this is like the first
Mm-hmm.
time I came. This was like 2008, maybe even earlier. I came across something like that, where they basically just getting into that kind of user experience space, because the technology originally was created for people that were disabled, and so
Mhm.
um, they were either paralyzed or they had like body movement issues, and so they put up little cameras and computers that allowed those people to kind of browse websites with their eyes. So they would look at a button and it would click on it, and they would use the scrolling on the side using eye movements. And they
Mhm.
were kind of evolving from that into kind of putting those things into headsets with virtual kind of shelf environments, retail environments that would really track what people look at in advertising and shopping experiences. And I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. It's going to change the way people kind of think about the user experiences. I think this might have been the first time I came across something that was user experience specific. Um, are things like that adding to your industry, maybe creating concerns in the industry, moving people into the space of user experience? Are they replacing traditional firms? Like, how should we all think about AI and kind of evolving technology from the perspective of it replacing people? Because I think people are at the foundation of everything, and all those other things are tools. But as these things
Right.
become more smart, um, maybe they replace the people side.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot kind of wrapped up into what you just asked. And I think what we're seeing is that the places in which human beings are interacting with digital products are multiplying. We're seeing lots of innovation in the ways in which humans and technology interact. And some of these things are going to stick, some of these things are going to fall by the wayside over time. But I don't think that sitting at computers and carrying mobile phones in our faces while we walk down the street and trip over, cracks in the sidewalk because we're so distracted. I don't think that this is the future. I don't think this is the final destination for how technology is going to be used. Although I don't think that these platforms are going away anytime soon. We will continue to evolve and improve. And I think user experience is going to be important to all of that. We're going to have
Mhm.
to observe how real humans interact with all of these tools in order to get them right and see them achieve that sort of product market fit that really causes them to take off and become the next big thing. So we're excited about that. Designing for computers and designing for phones, there are a lot of patterns out there that users expect certain things to behave certain ways because we've been using these technologies for a long time. And that's cool. But I think there's a whole legion of designers that are excited about defining the patterns that will be used on these new emerging technologies and the ones that will become the de facto norms for those technologies as well. It's going to require testing and definition to figure out what works best for human beings in these new platforms. And oftentimes the first drafts are pretty rough. So, people put the technology out there, they have a visionary and an engineer, and they make something, and that's cool, but it only gets them so far because if it's clunky or a weird user experience, then nobody wants to buy it. And it
Right.
certainly can't cross the chasm into like major adoption. And so I think that the need for UX is probably going to increase with the way that software is getting easier and easier to develop. And it's probably also going to start to get even more specialized because we're going to have specialists that do user experience in these different spaces and a little bit more concentration where we're bringing more experience from a particular niche to conversations with people trying to innovate in that space. So there is going to be plenty to learn. And will technology replace some jobs? Yes, absolutely. But I think it's also going to create a whole lot of new opportunities that we don't even understand yet. So I'm not worried about it. I'm excited about it. And if I was to say my one area of concern is more with, caution around the autonomy with which we trust these
Hmm.
generative AI products, their data sources, the ethics of where the information is sourced, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it'll be interesting to see the industry shake through all that too.
That's awesome. Good answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Thank you,
Well,
Erin.
thank you.
It's been great.
It's been a really interesting conversation. I love getting a chance to kind of like go all the way to square one and kind of rebuild the story together. So thank you for having me. And if you've got any questions in the future, you want to talk business, I look forward to it. That's just as much design as anything that we make for the web is.
Absolutely. Where can people find you?
A great place to find me is on LinkedIn, Erin Young, and of course, always on slideux.com. You can find more information about both me and my company there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Erin. It's
Thank
been
you,
a pleasure.
David.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.